We will now call the workshops to order. Let the record show we still have all 7 board members in attendance. We'll turn it over to Dr. Fenoy to introduce the workshops. Dr. Fenoy.
Yes, sir. At this time, I'd like to introduce Chief Academic Officer Dr. Glenda Sheffield, Dr. June Issa, Ms. Elaine Herbert-Williams, Ms. Diane Wyatt, and Lisa Carmona to discuss our proposed expulsion policy, process and policy workshop. At this time, I turn it over.
Good afternoon, Board Chair, Vice Chair, Board members, and Dr. Fenoy. As the team continued to discuss the desired state of our expulsion process, the Board had asked previously that the team look at other school districts and determine what systems were being utilized. The process that is being shared today will remove Board from considering mitigating factors, will provide a streamlined process for addressing expulsions and behavior placements, provide a fair framework for all expulsions to be heard district-wide, and will allow parents to be heard earlier in the process. The expulsion policy was last updated in 2014. The proposed key changes and/or adjustments includes 3 methods of movement: the zero tolerance, which are incident-based, that falls under predetermined list of zero tolerance sanctions; severe incident-based assignments. These are incidents that occur that do not fall under the zero tolerance list, but nonetheless impact safety on our campuses, and behavior assignments is the last. And this assignment is where chronic behavior affects school operations. The implementation of a discipline committee and change and/or expand the hearing officers are also included in this recommendation. At this time, the team is going to continue on with this presentation. As they prepare to take us through the next few slides, I ask that we be reminded that we will be having a separate follow-up workshop on the desired state of our alternative education programs.
Good afternoon. If the process that we outline here today is approved, we will have a number of policies that will need to be revised. We will have 1 policy that will need to be repealed, and we will be bringing forward a new policy that will be called felony suspension. We're going to go through each one of these policies one by one to discuss what they presently cover and what the proposed changes will be.
So the first policy we'll discuss is policy 5.1814. This will be our zero tolerance policy. This proposed policy will implement Florida Statute 106.3. It will define the offenses that require an expulsion as required by state law. As a refresher, state law requires that any student who brings a firearm or weapon to school or makes a threat or false report to school involving a school personnel, school transportation, or school-sponsored activity be expelled from school for a period of no less than 1 year.
The next policy, which we'll be having to revise, is policy 5.1817. It is presently titled Student Expulsion, and as we just discussed, the only expulsions that we would be having going forward would be zero tolerance. So we will be changing this policy to be called Severe Incident Assignments, and this would cover all offenses that would not be covered in the zero tolerance. For example, we have level 4 offenses that would not be covered in zero tolerance. For example, one would be battery, and that would be covered under a severe incident assignment. In addition, we would be coming forward with a new policy which would be called felony suspension. Presently, the felony suspension language falls into our 5.18175 policy. There is a paragraph inside of that. We believe that this should stand on its own, and we would be proposing a new policy that would just cover what we do in our processes inside of felony suspensions. We would be repealing the student early reinstatement policy, which is 5.1818. And the reason we would be repealing that is because presently we are able to bring students back early for early reinstatement. But in the zero tolerance policy, it states inside the statute that we have to expel those students for 1 year. Therefore, there would be no student early reinstatements. So we would be repealing this policy.
The next policy that we will be revising or recommending revision for is policy 5.1819, designation of hearing officers. Pursuant to Florida statute, students have a right to due process, including the right to be heard before an impartial hearing officer for decisions that affect their substantial interests. We are proposing that the district hire attorneys in good standing with the Florida Bar at a reduced fee to conduct these impartial hearings. Students and their parents or guardians will have an opportunity to present evidence, dispute the facts at these hearings, which would be held on set days here at district offices.
We're going to move into the procedural changes, and we're going to be going through some flow charts. But before we do that, I want to just cover probably the biggest change that we would have within our system, and that's going to be that we would be bringing forward a discipline review committee. This will be replacing our expulsion screening committees, and this new committee will be comprised of the individuals that are listed on the PowerPoint slide, and it will meet once a week for 4 hours here at the district office. And inclusive of those that are not listed would be the principal of the school as well as the parents, for them to both bring forward the situations that happened on the campus that brought us to the Discipline Review Committee. We would have one principal representative from each level, elementary, middle, and high school. We would have one representative from the regional office, one from the Office of Safe Schools, one from Support Services. We would also have legal representation there. They will be a non-voting member of the committee. There will be one member from the Department of Behavioral and Mental Health, as well as ESC, and other district personnel as the cases warrant. This is actually the outline of what the zero tolerance policy will look like. And again, this is going to be the only expulsion cases that we bring forward that would follow this policy. The others would be placements. And it's going to go through the fact that the first thing that we're going to be doing is having a situation with a conversation with the parent and the principal at the school center. And then we're going to be moving forward with the students who have violated the zero tolerance policy and moving them into alternative education sites while we go through the rest of the process. The parent would be notified of the discipline review committee, and they would be invited up to the district office for that meeting, again, that we just talked about. And we would have, during that time, we would have an opportunity for both the parent and for the school center to go over the situation, what occurred, what evidence we have, et cetera. And then there would be a rendering of a decision based on the discipline committee. They would take a vote, and they would determine whether we're going to be moving forward with the zero tolerance expulsion, or we're going to be referring that case back out to the regional office for placement other than in an alternative ed site. If we decide at that time that we're going to move forward, we would notify the parent of that, and then we would allow that parent the opportunity to go for a hearing officer, as Lisa just explained, and then we would have that process done again where the school center and the parent have the opportunity in front of the hearing officer to be heard. Again, the hearing officer would render a decision. Same thing would happen if we're moving forward with the zero tolerance. It would go to the board. If not, it would go back to the regional office. So this outlines what it would look like and the due process. And again, the opportunities for parents to be heard at many different points during this process for all zero tolerance cases.
Board members, do you have any questions so far? So I have a couple, if I may. So on that flow chart, the hearing officer issues findings of fact, including credible mitigating factors. So at that point, he could say that there should not be an expulsion? Is that what that means? He can find mitigating factors to say that the student should not be expelled?
The hearing officer would be able to issue findings of fact and indicate that there are mitigating factors. However, the hearing officer cannot render a decision. Only the board can vote on a decision to expel a student.
So he finds mitigating factors. What does that mean? He finds mitigating factors that the student should not be expelled, and now the board has to make the decision, but we have no authority not to expel a student that committed a zero. So tell me what that means. What mitigating factors, if he finds mitigating factors, what does that result in for the school board?
It would result, the end result would be the same. If the hearing officer found that the facts presented and the evidence presented supported the position by the district that the student had committed a zero tolerance offense, either way, the law would require an expulsion.
Okay, so no matter what the hearing officer does, the student's going to be expelled.
Well, the hearing officer could find that there was not enough evidence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is, and we discussed this on the phone with Ms. Eason. So So the parent is going to come before the school board if they want to do that. But we have absolutely no authority to reverse the expulsion. So I would like, and I'm speaking for myself, not the other board members, but I would like whatever that policy says, that it's clear that the parent, I don't want just a verbal, I want it in policy that the parent is told in writing that you can appear before the school board only because we're going to do this in closed session because of privacy reasons for your student, but the school board has absolutely no authority to reverse the expulsion. So, you know, it's kind of pointless for the parent to meet with us in the first place, but I'm just concerned that we're building hopes that no matter what you tell them, we're building hopes that they can come before the school board and plead their case, and we're going to somehow miraculously turn this into a non-expulsion when that's not possible. So I understand we have to give them a right to talk to us, and I understand that we're going to do it privately so that they don't have to talk their children's names in public, but I'm just concerned that they're going to have these hopes that this private meeting is going to result in some miraculous turnaround for them. So I just want to make sure that the parent is clear, absolutely clear, that we can't do anything about this. I wish we didn't have to hear them at all, because it's hard for us to listen to them tell about their student in closed session and then tell them, sorry you came today, we can't do anything about it. But I'm concerned with that. The other question is on this discipline review committee, and we talked about this. I want to make sure there's diversity on that committee. So there should be something in policy that requires, not just somebody makes a decision, well, we don't have a Hispanic on the committee today, and we have a Hispanic student there. I want to make sure the policy is clear that we have diversity, you know, that mirrors the diversity in the district. So Hispanic, African American, whatever, we just have the diversity of that committee that's there. Since the school board is not going to have any opportunity to review anything later, I want to make sure that there's diversity represented there, okay?
So diversity, for point of clarification, diversity of the caseload that will be coming forth at that particular time, diversity of the district.
If we have a black student before I want to make sure there's black
Okay.
members on there. If there's a Hispanic student, I want to make sure there's Hispanic.
Okay.
So whatever we have to work that, I just want the policy to be clear that there will be, yeah,
Understood.
Mr. Superintendent.
Yeah, Dr. Shelford, I think similar to Dr. LaCava's shop when we do interviews now, that we're very intentional about the diversity of the candidates that sit on those review panels. I would just meet with Dr. LaCava's team and create that same policy.
Okay, thank you.
And last question. Go ahead, Dr. Robinson. On the threats, you know, when we looked at the first slide, it says, where is it? Talks about the zero tolerance possible students found bringing a firearm or weapon, making a threat or false report. I mean, what type of threats? I mean, we have a fourth grader that says, you know what, I'm going to shoot my friend in class because I don't like him. I mean, are we going to expect, is there any way to, I mean, how is threat defined? I mean, we have kids that make stupid mistakes. You know, if you're older and you can think through this, it's one thing. But, you know, we have, you know, children that aren't able to think straight and they say something that's really, there's no way they could have done it in the first place. I mean, who's making the decision whether a threat constitutes a zero tolerance offense?
Each of the situations is investigated at the school center, and we've put in place the threat assessment teams this year.
Okay.
So that process would take place. We would have that process, Mrs. Wyatt's staff would attend those meetings and walk them through that process, and we would determine whether it was a high, medium, or low threat.
Okay.
So absolutely, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Robinson and then Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. So just to follow up, so I hope that we have diversity of thought on the panel, right? Because I don't know, my best example is we have Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court, and I have never heard him render a decision from the view of African-American people. So, and I also think that diversity needs to be there on a standing basis, not like pull in a black administrator because it's a black student. Mm-hmm. It just should be diverse continuously, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the hearing officer, though, does not make a decision. The hearing officer makes a recommendation to the superintendent, essentially, right? And so, as I understand, and I want to thank Lisa Carmona for sitting with me and listening to my 3,000 questions, but as I understand, then the superintendent, though, even if it was a zero tolerance offense, could decide that in his opinion there were mitigating circumstances and document all that and therefore not expel the student. Am I incorrect?
That's exactly what the statute states.
Okay, and so then when we have these closed door hearings, even though they're technically meeting with the school board, they're actually, and the hearing officer's opinion would actually be, the ears to hear it would be the superintendent's in that zero tolerance case, right? Okay, so, just so that I understand. So then the other thing is, so these felony suspensions, and there's another category, but we really need to make sure that as we get past this initial phase with the policies, that we have guidelines, right? Because what I remain concerned about is, just like with student code of conduct, how do you code it? What do you call it? You can upscale it in what you call it, right? And so I don't want that to happen and have it meet the guidelines of a felony suspension or what used to be a safety placement. I haven't changed terms yet, so hang on. But we still need to have guidelines for staff, not rules. I'm not trying to be too rigid, but guidelines, right? For them to make those decisions. And I also hope, and I know, well, let me ask this. When you have an estimate on when we will have that workshop on alternative ed?
We're hoping for March, the workshop date in March. I think
Okay.
it's March 4, March.
So I'm concerned about not seeing what's going on, not seeing the problems that the children are having that lead to these considerations for placement elsewhere. And so as you move forward, would you please consider a way to report that to the board? I don't know if that's a spreadsheet of each one of these committee meetings. So I don't need to know children's names, but I would like to know what happened, what the consideration and what the decision was. Because I really think, it is in that process to let me know that we had to address social emotional needs of children, because I kept seeing it, right? And so I'm hoping that you guys create a reporting mechanism so that we see the patterns of the problem, so that we can use our positional authority to help address them, right?
Capturing.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then I just want to throw out this last thing that I know actually belongs in the alternative ed workshop, but I want to say this. The whole thing has to be about meeting the needs of children. I think this is great progress. I really do. I hope that we get to a place where when students are in that limbo place pending a decision by this committee, as I understand, as they're in limbo, they've been told to not come back to their comprehensive school. They will be sent to turning points. And when they're at turning points, did I misunderstand our conversation, Ms. Carmona?
To an alternative ed site.
Okay.
Not just turning points.
Exactly, to
Any one of our
anyone wherever
sites.
is
Okay,
closest to
well,
their
when I
home.
fix alternative ed, it will be turning points. I'm gonna just tell you, we will argue that case later. But when they go, we need to evaluate their needs so we can meet them, right? So for example, they need to have like a career interest inventory, ASVAB or whatever the appropriate one would be. They need to have a culturally competent psychosocial evaluation, right? We need to take that moment in time to figure out how do we help them, right? And I'm hoping that we will do that with all intentionality. Okay, I'll be quiet.
Mrs. Anders?
Thank you. And as I met with you, Ms. Issa and Ms. Carmona, this is definitely better than where we've been, and now we're kind of getting where some of the other counties are as it relates to trying to take better care of our children. But as I look at this chart, and I think I talked about this with you, I worry about the parents. And I think one of the things that you said, that these committees will be meeting here in this building, but you will be having some of the committees meet in the far west region of the Glades region when they can't get over here. Is that correct?
We'll have some process in place, whether it be a technology or we'll go out to the Glades area. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and another piece of that would be, I love how it's laid out where parents are going to be notified and everybody's going to know this or that, but I do know sometimes parents don't get the information at their homes, even though you say you sent it through registered mail and this and that. Sometimes people don't know what's going on as it relates to their children, and I did ask you the question as to if a child has fallen into one of these categories, they didn't turn up to school, what's the next step after you've sent all this paperwork to get the parent involved in getting the child back? What are you going to do?
We had a conversation after our conversation, and we're going to discuss which site is going to take on the responsibility of trying to contact that parent. You know, whether that's going to be a continued conversation with a home visit or something of that sort, I'm not sure at this point, but we're going to continue that conversation to make sure that we notify the parents and get some type of contact with them. You know, we're going to have certified letters, we're going to have phone calls, and then we'll do what we can to try and make sure that that child gets enrolled in one of our schools.
And as the parents are coming to your sessions and looking at the video and everybody's talking to them, sometimes parents need a little bit more help. And I know that you're working this piece for the children, so as you work through this process with parents, what kind of additional support will you give parents who are actually working their children through this process?
Well, we're giving the opportunity for the two videos, the one for the video at the school center first, and then we'll do the video again at the alternative site, for us to go through with the parent what types of resources we have on our centers, you know, because of all of our alternative sites have additional resources that we've put there. So we'll go over that with the parents, and we'll make sure that they have a contact at the school center for them to know that if their child, you know, is having difficulty, who they can reach out to on the school center.
And just the last question, Mr. Barbieri, and I know that they're going to be placed at an alternative site. Dr. Roberts was talking about turning points. But if for some reason, will the parents have any input as to which alternative site they'll be placed in based on maybe some modifications or concerns based on that placement?
We have had those opportunities for parents where they have shared with us, you know, why they could not go to one site, or we have inside information that, you know, we need to move them to another site. We'll continue those conversations with parents.
Great.
Mr. Superintendent?
Yeah, I just have a question, or maybe even a statement for the team that's working on this to consider. A lot of times, children in the most severe cases are homeless. They don't have a parent to advocate for them. So with all of these pieces, which are great, I just want to make sure that we're cognizant that some of our kids that find themselves in situations don't have any of those support systems. So I would love for us to clearly articulate what we do for those children.
Okay, thanks, understood.
If I can, just a quick follow-up on Dr. Robinson's comments. So when I discussed with you, I'd like to go one step further on the reporting. I would like you to give the school board a monthly reporting at our board meeting of which children have been suspended, which one have committed severe incidents. I would have broken down by race. I want to know, you know, if they were African American, Hispanic. I want information so that this board understands what we're doing to children, because when we make these kind of decisions, we're affecting that child's life, right? Because this is on their transcript that they were removed from a school, or they were expelled, or they whatever. So I just want to make sure the board is fully aware of what's happening. Since we're not going to have the opportunity to sit with these children in the future and hear from them or their parents, I want to make sure that we are aware by a report. So if you could figure out some way that the policy requires you to give the school board a report on a regular basis of how the children were handled when there's a threat assessment and they're moved.
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Andrews?
And just to follow up on that, I think that's absolutely great, Mr. Barbieri, because when you walk into the alternative sites now, and I certainly have never received the paperwork to tell me about who's in there, but when you look at who's in there, we know who's in there. I don't have to say it. It sounds like it's more African American and Hispanic kids in these sites, and that's before all of this piece that we're doing right now. So I just really want to make sure that we do get that, because we know what has been going on for years, and I do visit those sites.
All right,
Okay.
Superintendent. Good.
Thank you. I'm going to skip to, we've gone through the zero tolerance already. We went through the chart, the procedural chart. So we're going to skip to the next process that we're going to cover, which is the severe incident assignment. The flow chart is there, but we put it out on the other chart as well. So, Mrs. Wyatt?
Yes. For non-zero tolerance event, when that event happens, it's one that has an imminent threat on campus. It impacts that campus completely. If that event happened off campus, I would follow the felony suspension piece. If it happened on campus, then the school would be notifying their regional superintendent, regional instructional sup. They would also notify the director of Safe Schools for us to look at the concerns and look at exactly what happened. If by some chance it doesn't elevate itself to that level to move forward, it would go to the regional office and follow the code of conduct. If it is upheld, we then move on to, they would receive support from support services in completing all of the information needed to gather in order to move to a discipline review committee, which we've talked about. That discipline review committee would make their recommendations. If the parent is in favor or agrees with those recommendations, the recommendation would be honored. If not, and the parent wishes to appeal, we would then move on to our next slide, which is talking about the hearing officer. And they would have the ability to appeal to the hearing officer. Their recommendation would move to our chief academic officer and deputy superintendent for review that time. And they would then update from there.
Mrs. Andrews, you have a question?
And we talked a little bit about that in our meeting. Many times you might have a severe incident that might not be on the campus, and somebody could be associated with a severe incident, and they were not maybe the person that actually did the offense, but yet and still the police gets involved and everybody is tagged. And so as a result, a school may feel threatened because of an incident that happened somewhere else, and children are left out there wondering where they're going as far as the next step. So you may have gotten the perpetrators, the people who were actually involved, but some other people have been named. And so what are you going to do with that? Because I just don't want the kids at home because they can't get back to school because the police or somebody said that they can't be back there because they're part of that whole severe incident or whatever happened, some shooting somewhere, and they were just at the party. And they didn't do anything, but yet and still somebody said, well, yeah, they did do something because they were a part of the gang. Oh, so what happens to those people that are out there that may not be the ones that actually went to jail or was arrested or whatever?
We would, again, go through the threat assessment process that we've outlined and that we've trained the school centers on to determine who is a threat on our campuses and determine whether we need to move any of those students. So each of those students would have an individual threat assessment done to determine whether we need to move them or not.
I guess I'm worried about the parents because we've had some incidents before where parents had their children home because they couldn't get back to school because they were involved in the surroundings of it. So you'll know who these people are, and everybody will get into the parents' view quickly as possible so that those children won't be sitting home for days and days.
Yes,
okay.
Dr. Robinson?
Oops, sorry.
So I just want to follow up on that. So again, this is where guidelines are. You keep saying the threat assessment teams, and I guess I did not understand the expansiveness of the work of the threat assessment teams. Is it the threat assessment teams that would need to have the guidelines, or the administrator?
They're the same.
Or both?
The both, right.
Okay, and then, so there was one question that at least I don't think was answered in my meeting earlier this week. So with a severe incident, something happens on Saturday, word hits the street, the school is aware, there's concern that there'll be problems on campus. You tell Johnny you can't come to school while we figure this out. Where's Johnny going? Where does Johnny go on Tuesday? Because Monday he came to school and you told him to go home, right? So where does he go on Tuesday?
That shouldn't take place. We
Okay.
should, unless we have suspended the child should be in school. and then we go ahead and do the threat assessments on our campuses. But the child should not be told not to come to school. We have to do a threat assessment. We need to have school police. We need to have outside. And again, this is you're talking about incidences that happen off campuses, and those are governed by statute as it relates to felony suspensions. So we have those guidelines that we have to follow for felony suspensions. The severe incidents are going to be incidences that happen on our campuses. Back in the chart, it actually shows you the two branches off of the two where it goes from felony suspension because it happened off of our campus. But again, those kids should be on campuses, and we should be doing threat assessments and assessing whether, we have to move them or not.
Okay, I need to follow up. So felony suspension, as I recall, is only when they're charged with a felony,
Yes, ma'am.
right? So, and I get the on-campus. So there's been many times that there have been severe incidences off campus, and nobody's been charged or not charged yet. And we did safety placements because of the brouhaha, right? And so are we not doing that anymore? Are we, even if we know about what happened over the weekend and we are concerned, we're gonna say, come on to school and we'll just figure it out later? Because I can't imagine the principals are agreeing with you on that.
They didn't.
I mean, it looks like there's a little hole there that needs to be closed, right?
Okay, and we no longer have safety placements,
Right.
so hopefully we're closing that hole, but the safety of the campuses is important. So we need to assess, and we'll have that conversation as soon as school starts on a Monday or the next day. But students should not be sent home without having a suspension.
So, okay, I'm sorry, I need clarity, because see, we changed the words on me. So the old safety placements are not included under severe incident assignment? Because I heard the boxes of thing off campus charged with felony suspension, that falls under here. I hear the severe incident on campus. What used to be called the safety placement was bad thing off campus that there's a concern will come onto campus. I need to know if that box is included under severe incident assignment.
It could be after a threat assessment is done and we determine that there's a threat to the campus.
Okay, so I'm gonna let this go, Mr. Superintendent. I think that has to be fixed, okay? Because that has, to me, over all these years, that is the hole that was not being addressed formally and in a systemic and structural way, and that's the hole that most needs guidelines, in my opinion. I've talked to way too many principals about, after way too many incidences, for me to think it's okay for some of these incidences, not all, some of these incidents off campus to come on campus on Monday, right? I'm just saying, not all, and that's where the guidelines fit, because what might be, I might consider a level 5, somebody else might consider a level 10, so to speak, right? So you gotta have guidelines, but please work on that, Ms. Issa. Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Rico?
No, I was just going to clarify that the old safety placements, for the most part, and I think that's what the team was getting at, will be covered by the threat assessment process, because, for the most part, where there's a nexus, there's a threat, on Saturday, I'm gonna come to school and blow people up on Monday. Okay, so that used to be a safety placement type of situation. Now we have a statute, now we have a process, it's called the threat assessment piece. There is still a gap where it's not a threat, it's not a felony that's been charged yet, but it's a situation that has the important piece is there is a nexus, there is a safety issue, and now we've got to tie that piece together in terms of the legal grounds to, remove or otherwise deal with the student in an appropriate manner. And I think that's the gap. It's a small gap, but an important one. And so, it's a nexus between all of the competing interests of student due process, educational issues, the safety of the campus, the compliance with the statutes, et cetera. So it's a challenging space, and we will be continuing to look at that.
Mrs. Andrews?
Yeah, and I won't keep talking about it, but that's exactly what I was talking about. And during that period of time, that parent, as well as that student, and I mean, you're talking about it could be within a 24 to a 72-hour time frame outside of the school. I don't know where it's going to fit in here, where we're going to be able to get to the parents, because many times parents are surprised by all of this that's happening. And law enforcement is in charge at that time. If somebody's gone to jail, or they thought they were going to go to jail, or there may be a warrant out for them, or they're going to get picked up. So I just want to know where the school fits into this. The principals really want some guidance, because it's been left into their hands as to figure out who can come back, or you need to stay home. So I just really want to know where that box is when something happened on Friday night. And did anybody make a connection with that home, that child, as well as the principal with the situation as to what the next steps are? We went through that already in my district, and it just needs to be cleaned up. And that's what I was talking with you all about the other day. I'd like to see that somewhere.
Mr. Superintendent?
Yeah, Dr. Robinson, Ms. Andrews, I hear you loud and clearly. I think to close this, we will work on those pieces. I think it should be stated for the record that Chief Kitzero's team, June Nisa, they work closely on these. And I also, as I understand the old safety placement, it's not just in instances of things that happen in the streets. We do safety placement if there's a big brawl on a campus, and we have to separate those kids. And so I would ask the team to look at that, but also as we think about the alternative ed sites, those could be temporary placements prior to, as we do all the things that the board members are suggesting. So when we reevaluate the whole all ed site, some of them may just be holding places until we get through the major brouhaha and figure out all the gang pieces, et cetera, et cetera. So just think about that potentially as an alternative instead of just, because I think what Dr. Robinson is saying, without real guidance, the principals just do what they think is best. And their first indication or inclination, I know I would as a principal, I need to say first. So if all 5 of y'all can stay home so I can have school on Monday, we'll deal with the rest of it later. But I think in truth, if we have sites that we can place kids, just make it part of a process, and we figure that part out, if that makes sense to the board.
Thank you. We're going to go through the last process, which is the behavior assignment. Ms. Hubbard-Williams.
Okay. The behavior assignments are for students who have chronic behavior on comprehensive campus, and it's not been resolved by interventions that have been put in place for a particular amount of time. Schools are required to document the interventions and replacement behaviors for these students and show that they've made an effort to reevaluate the student looking at their behaviors based on the interventions. And after that process, and they note that the interventions are not working, they proceed to the next step by going to school-based team. And the students will stay on campus during that time as they work through the interventions. If the interventions work, the students get to remain, but if we see where there are no improvements for the students, that's the time we bring the team together to have a conversation about moving the student to an alternative site. Additionally, the principal and his team will complete the required documentation and then move it to the DRC. And at that point, the DRC will look at the facts of the case and recommend either for the student to remain on campus or for the student to be sent to alternative ed or possibly another comprehensive campus within their region. Now, if the parent agrees, the process ends. If the parent decides to appeal, then the process continues. The parent can appeal to the hearing officer, who will review the facts of the case and at that point make a recommendation of those facts as well as based on the law. That recommendation will be given to the Assistant Superintendent of Wellness to determine if the student will be assigned to alternative ed or assigned to another comprehensive campus by the regional office. And if you show, that's the process as a whole. And that's basically the behavior assignments, and those are the vast majority of our assignments in our department.
Ms. Brill?
Thank you. And the only concern I have in that particular part is where you mentioned that the student be moved to possibly another typical school within the region. Within the region often becomes a sticking point, so that if a child has to be moved to another comprehensive school, I think that we need to have some flexibility in there. Let's say a parent works in Boca, but their region is like Central or North County. I know from experience, fortunately, when Dr. Licata was in that area, he was very helpful in getting the area offices to collaborate. But it takes knowing the right people to get that done. And I just want to make sure we don't lock any student into a particular region if, especially when a parent wants to provide the transportation, let's have a little flexibility. So if you can work that into your process, just understanding that a lot of parents will want to drive their child, particularly if they've had behavioral issues and they're putting them in a different school. Thank you.
Ms. Whitfield?
Thank you. I don't want this to get lost in all of our discussion today, but I want to let you guys know how much I appreciate you working on this. This has been something that has been really hard for us as a board, but I can speak for myself, definitely. It's been very difficult I hate watching children get expelled, and I think it's something that nobody likes to do. So the fact that you've taken this much time and put this much effort into it to really clean up this process just means a lot to me, and I want to say thank you so much. Also, I wanted to say how much I am looking forward to the Discipline Review Committee being created. I think that's a brilliant idea. I love the idea that the children are truly going to get heard, because I think that's something we've been feeling for a while, is that we're missing something, and I don't want to lose a child in any of this. So I just want to say thank you so much.
Mrs. Andrews?
Yeah, I think this part for the behavior is better than it has been over the years. This is an area where it was truly abusive for many, many years. And as I walk into Turning Points and some of the other places, I think we've really talked to the schools and done a better job with them before they actually identify people and move them out. Many of the folks that's going to alternative ed we'll never see based on these behavior assignments. And I wonder, do we have as much due diligence in working with the parents? Because I just know that sometimes I look up and I see these children in the alternative site, and I was wondering, are you actually making as much due diligence with parents to make sure that they're agreeing? I see it says they can't appeal, but I see a lot of them are in there. Do they know about their appeal process, the parents, and so on? Question?
As we roll this out, yes, we will be having those opportunities. That's part of what we'll be training, we'll be in the video and the other processes as we go through. So yes, they'll have that opportunity. This is going to be a new piece that we put in there, so yes.
Yeah, because they didn't before. I think some people's kids were in there and parents said, well, they just told me my kid had to go over here to Turning Points or had to go to Crossroads. So this is a big piece. And I just want to make sure parents know that. And I don't know if it's a letter being sent to somebody's house and they don't get it, because I just see a lot of houses with no mailboxes sometimes. So I wonder, will the parent liaison or somebody, when something happens at a school and they have to be moved to an alternative placement and you can't get the parent involved, do you have your staff or whoever it is that's going to actually go and do that home visit and find out what's going on? I mean, do you have that piece in play?
We will have that conversation as it relates to when we're rolling out this piece. But yes, as we mentioned before, the parent liaisons and other individuals. It's very important that when we have these meetings, even prior to a behavior placement now, that we have meetings on campuses, that we have the parent be part of the conversations, because we're going to be building interventions in for the students. So we try as much as we can to get that parent in and before we're even doing the placement, but absolutely at the placement meeting. And very often those are sometimes they'll take place on the phone or other places. But yes, we will include the parent liaison in making sure that the parent is aware, that the student is struggling in the beginning, and then also as we navigate through the process.
Yes, because I think that's really, excuse me, Mr. Bobby, I think that's really important, because when I see the kids that are in there, sometimes I wonder why they're there, and I like the piece about the appeal, but if we can do a better job on that piece, that might end up keeping somebody back into their comprehensive school rather than actually signing the piece of paper and sending them on over somewhere else.
Board members, we have to wrap this up by 4 o'clock, so Ms. Easy, do you have more that you want to?
No, that concluded it. That was, no, I'm done, thank you.
Knowing that you have 3.5 minutes, you. Dr. Robinson?
Just one late point on the hearing officers. So I personally don't think that they should be hired by the school district. I personally think that they should receive whatever their little bit of money is from some third party. I just think that we need to try to put that additional piece of independence in the process. So that's one thing. The second thing is on the behavior assignments. So when you look at, who's looking at the packets now? Is it your shop?
My shop.
Okay, so when you look at the packets, do you look to make sure that the student has worked with the case manager, a behavioral health professional, and/or a mental health professional?
Absolutely. Prior to coming to an alternative site, we look at all of those pieces to see if these things were put in place and how successful the student was in terms of receiving those type of services, and did they have an impact on the student prior to moving the student. If not, we do push back and recommend that the comprehensive school put some additional interventions in place prior to trying to move the student.
And so do you talk to them about, because there's a difference between what someone, say, for example, one of your case managers knows and what is reflected on the document, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes I've heard tales of where the case manager made the point that this student I think they need X, Y, Z because they said whatever, right? And that thing didn't really happen, but maybe it kind of partially happened and the paperwork looks okay, but that case manager, if asked, could say, well, if they move to alternative ed, you need to make sure that this is in place for them. Like, is it human-to-human conversation around about the student? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And we invite the case manager to the meeting prior to moving the student. Everybody's at the table to have some input, both positive and possibly negative, but it's all about what's going to be best for that student.
Okay, and then the last,
Dr. Robinson, we really have to stop because we have
It's not 4 o'clock.
another hour of stuff that we have to get through.
not 4 o'clock. It's 2 minutes to. I have one more thing. So I just want to offer this for consideration, and that is whether or not we can do a different placement for some students. I'm not creating the rules now. For some students, that's not alternative ed. And so the case in point is there was a young man whose mom contacted me who got kicked out of one of our middle schools, got kicked out of private school, who is thriving at Roosevelt, right? And so he just needed, and I could talk about my own children, but he just needed somebody who saw him differently and gave him a second chance. So I just want to throw that in the mix for consideration. I'm not trying to
Not
legislate
always having
that.
alternative ed as an option, give some other options.
Correct. Thank you.
Noted.
Thank you. Mr. Superintendent, you want to start your budget workshop?
Yes, if at this time I could have the chief, thank